Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being back on time. So we'll reconvene now and begin the testimony with Knowledge Ecology International. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Spencer Goldman, and I'm Counsel for Policy and Legal Affairs for Knowledge Ecology International, KEI, a nonprofit organization based here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Please pause. The transcriber is not here.
I could say that again. It's fine.
We'll give you the full time.
That's good.
Thank you. Please begin.
Sure.
But unfortunately, you have to spell your name again.
That's fine.
That should be difficult.
My name is Andrew Spencer Goldman, Goldman, and I am Counsel for Policy and Legal Affairs for Knowledge Ecology International, KEI, a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. KEI primarily focuses on issues pertaining to the creation, use, and management of knowledge goods. KEI has long questioned the assumptions, methodology, and objectives of the Special 301 review. One almost unquestioned assumption is that copyright and pharmaceutical companies are essential U.S. assets that deserve our protection. A March 2013 report by Jonathan Band and Jonathan Garafi titled Foreign Ownership of Firms in IP-Intensive Industries should be required reading for this committee. Among the findings of their report, 4 of the big 6 English language trade publishers were foreign-owned, and these foreign-owned companies published more than 2/3 of the trade books in the U.S. 4 of the 5 largest STM, science, technical, and medical professional publishers, were foreign-owned. More than 90% of the revenue of the 5 largest STM professional publishers was generated by foreign-owned firms. The Band study also looks at the foreign ownership of the recording music, film, and other intellectual property-intensive industries. The KEI written submission in this proceeding noted that even for firms like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, the majority of employees work outside of the United States. For Pfizer, 2 of 3 jobs are in foreign countries. KEI is particularly concerned about cancer drugs, and so too, it seems, is pharma and USTR, given the extraordinary trade pressures on India. As our submission notes, 2 Swiss firms, Roche and Novartis, had more than 45% of the global oncology market in 2013. Bayer, the firm at the center of the Nexavar compulsory licensing dispute, is a German firm. Over the past 5 years, a majority of new cancer drugs approved by the FDA were registered by foreign-owned firms. Many of the comments from the pharmaceutical lobby focus on a set of policies that lead to higher drug prices. These include, among others, demands that countries grant multiple patents on new uses, formulations, combinations, and doses of older drugs, demands that governments extend patent terms beyond 20 years, complaints about the use of compulsory licenses to curb excessive prices for drugs, and demands that governments provide exclusive rights to test data used to prove the efficacy and safety of drugs. Pharma's 208-page submission also makes extensive complaints about government efforts to exercise cost controls. The word price appears 359 times in the submission, and the context is always that pharma wants the United States to use its power to promote higher drug prices. Before turning to the impact of these trade policy enforced norms on the United States, consider for a moment the impact on people living in developing countries. In 2013, the United States had per capita income of $53,470. For last year's Special 301 list, the median per capita income of the countries on the watch list was $7,120, just 13.3% of incomes in the United States. For the priority watch list, the median per capita income was just $5,340, less than 1/10 the per capita income in the United States. A person earning 3 times that much would qualify for Medicaid in the United States. For many of the people living in developing countries on the 301 list, health insurance is quite limited or non-existent. The Doha Declaration on the TRIPS Agreement and Public Health, adopted in 2001 and agreed to by the United States under the Bush administration, states in paragraph 4 that the TRIPS agreement does not and should not prevent members from taking measures to protect public health, and that the agreement can and should be interpreted and implemented in a manner supportive of WTO members' right to protect public health, and in particular, to promote access to medicines for all. During the December WTO trade policy review of the United States, USTR officials reiterated the Obama administration's full support of the Doha Declaration. But policies that make access to medicines for all impossible are clearly, obviously, and without any room for doubt, contrary to the plain language and the intent of the Doha Declaration. This is most visibly true for the new high-priced cancer drugs, most of which have prices in excess of $100,000 per year. When the government of India considered a compulsory license for dasatinib, a drug for leukemia that Bristol Myers Squibb priced at $108 per day, in a country with GNI per capita of $1,570, USTR was widely reported to have pressured India, and the license was blocked. So how does this play out? BMS sales in India at a price of $108 per day will be very limited, but cancer patients will suffer the consequences of having no access. This policy is wrong and tarnishes our reputation around the world. With respect to the United States, the policies that pharma wants, the norms that pharma is promoting through trade policy are designed to raise prices. And while the impact of high prices is harsh in developing countries, it also creates problems in the United States. Many developing countries have higher birth rates and shorter life expectancy than does the United States. About 14% of the US population is now 65 or older. For the entire world, the figure is 8%. For Latin America and the Caribbean, 7%. For South Asia, 5%. Because cancer has higher incidence in older populations, we will bear a disproportionate burden of high cancer drug prices, and things will get worse. In 5 years, more than 16% of the US population will be 65 or older. In 15 years, it will be 19.3%. US employers are already struggling with the taxes and insurance premiums to pay for expensive drugs. Things are getting worse, not better, and USTR is part of the problem. Instead of supporting policies that are both harmful and wasteful, that place strains on us at home and have such harmful effects on poor people living in the developing world, USTR should be pursuing new trade policies. The funding of R&D should be the focus of trade policy, not the promotion of stronger IPR or higher drug prices. Trade policy can be reformed to reconcile both innovation and access, and lower barriers to reforms that improve the value for money spent on R&D. This includes, most importantly, for the longer run, evaluation of strategies to de-link R&D costs from product prices. We would like to supplement the written record with suggestions for how this can be done. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we will absolutely accept the invitation to receive more information on the R&D. I know we know that the director of KEI has spent a great deal of time and energy developing some proposals on R&D. So we would absolutely like to receive those. So we don't have much time left, and we do have some questions, but let me just say a couple of things. One, obviously, much of your testimony was not directed specifically at the 301 statute, but let me just say that, we always I think, welcome facts, and there were some facts in the testimony, and certainly are open to competing views. I think all of us here on the committee and all of us in the U.S. government do our best to get to the right answer. Sometimes we're constrained by laws and regulations, and sometimes we have to engage in processes that may not make sense to some people, but I think that we all do our very best. I think we also fundamentally disagree with some of the things that you said. This isn't a debate, so I'm not going to take you point by point, but I think suffice it to say that we all believe in trade and investment and see no problem with foreign ownership of firms, and think that any U.S. job, regardless of who creates that job, is worth protecting. So we'll just say that, I think, for the record. We did have a couple of questions, so we're almost out of time, but I would like to ask at least the first one that we had planned to ask, because I think it's very important, because this country is the subject of review this year.
All right. Hello. So I have a question with regard to the issuance of compulsory licenses in Ecuador, which we've seen over the last year. On page 109 of its submission, Pharma notes the following, quote, "The compulsory licenses that have been granted to date have not been based on a clear demonstration of an urgent public health emergency or due process provided to the patent owners consistent with Ecuador's international obligations." I was just wondering if you have a response to that concern.
Thank you very much. That's a great question, and I would, if it's okay with you, since I'm brand new to KEI as of 2 weeks ago, I would appreciate the opportunity to respond in writing, if that's okay, and to supplement the record.
And then I'd like to add another question to that, and please do take the extra time to respond. So Professor Amir Attaran submitted a filing for this year's review that talked about online pharmacies and the dangers of online pharmacies. It's also something I think that we've highlighted in the past in reports and other USTR products. So one question that comes up frequently is, what role are the health NGOs? The NGOs that deal with sort of health-related issues, access to medicines, et cetera, what role is that community playing in trying to address the dangers that are presented to consumers as they seek low-cost alternatives? And have you given the thought to that? Have you partnered with companies or associations that are looking at this issue, and do you have any plans to?
Well, again, that's another great question, and if it's okay with you, not to be difficult, but I'd appreciate the opportunity to respond in writing.
Absolutely. Look forward to both of those responses, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So I'd like to call the next witness, please, representing the National Association of Manufacturers. Our next witness representing hopefully a technology company that can fix it. The National Association of Manufacturers. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Chris Moore, and I'm Senior Director for International Business Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the NAM and its more than 14,000 member companies. Innovation drives and supports U.S. leadership in manufacturing. The value of intangible assets to the U.S. economy topped $9 trillion in 2011 and accounts for at least 90% of the total market value of a wide array of industries. As explained further in our written comments, manufacturers in the United States face serious obstacles to adequate and effective intellectual property protection and enforcement in India, China, Canada, and other large and emerging markets. These obstacles are harming or threatening to harm a wide array of manufacturers across the country and their ability to create and sustain jobs. At last year's Special 301 hearing, the NAM raised a number of pressing challenges manufacturers are facing in India. All of these challenges continue. They include, among other things, widespread piracy of software, films, and other creations, a competition policy that requires IP owners to license essential facilities, a manufacturing policy that encourages the compulsory licensing of green technology, and a patent law that creates an additional hurdle for the protection of innovations that is out of step with global norms. The NAM appreciates recent U.S. government efforts to improve engagement with India on intellectual property and other matters, including through a high-level working group on IPR under the U.S.-India Trade Policy Forum. But to be credible, such engagement must deliver concrete progress and real results on these and other outstanding intellectual property concerns. Progress and results are in India's interest too. The ITC recently found that more than 60% of firms affected by regulatory and IP barriers in India have responded by directing fewer resources to that market. However, eliminating trade and investment restrictions and raising IP protection standards in India would increase U.S. exports to that country by 2/3 and more than double U.S. investment. The NAM urges the Special 301 Committee to maintain India on the priority watch list for 2015 and to conduct a rigorous and thorough out-of-cycle review later this year to evaluate the results of engagement, actual progress, and actual solutions. Manufacturers welcome developments over the last year on intellectual property concerns in China, including commitments on trade secrets made during the strategic and economic dialogue. We urge continued vigilance to further strengthen enforcement of trade secrets in China and to ensure these commitments are put in place as intended. However, manufacturers continue to face other significant challenges in China, including with respect to counterfeiting and piracy, standard-setting practices, service inventions, and trademark enforcement. For these reasons, the NAM urges the Special 301 Committee to maintain China on the priority watch list for 2015 and to continue to pursue progress on outstanding concerns through bilateral dialogues and other appropriate forums. Canada's intellectual property protection and enforcement regime is falling behind the standards maintained in the rest of the developed world, and manufacturers are very concerned about recent developments in that market. Among other things, Canadian courts have redefined patent utility to create an additional hurdle for the protection of innovative medicines through a promise doctrine that is inconsistent with global rules and out of step with global norms. This promise doctrine wrongly conflates patent utility with effectiveness for regulatory approval, requiring evidence well beyond usefulness be shown in a patent application and long before that information can be demonstrated. Application of this doctrine confounds the very systems and processes Canada and other countries have established to bring medical innovations to market and already has been used to invalidate 20 patents. The NAM urges federal agencies to continue to engage Canadian authorities in the coming months on this and other IP concerns and to consider all tools at its disposal to secure results. Finally, the NAM urges further work to better enable small and medium-sized businesses, which account for the vast majority of NAM members, to secure and enforce their intellectual property rights overseas. For small businesses, the cost and complexity of securing and enforcing their rights around the world can be very high relative to their annual sales. International agreements like the Patent Cooperation Treaty have helped, but there is a long way to go. Counterfeiting and piracy and global trade in counterfeit and pirated goods remains a serious challenge for businesses of all sizes and imposes particular burdens on smaller firms. A recent survey of NAM members found that China remains the largest source of competing counterfeit and pirated goods. Those products generally are sold through online marketplaces and shipped via mail and other carriers. This is not a new concern. We know much about where and how this is happening. Federal agencies have taken important and welcome steps to address the problem. IP attachés are doing critical work around the world. But counterfeiting and piracy remains an urgent concern. To turn the tide, much more is needed, both by industry and government. The NAM would welcome an opportunity to engage you further in the coming months on additional ways to educate SMEs on cost-effective strategies and best practices to secure and enforce their rights, to help SMEs use available tools to protect their rights and access enforcement mechanisms abroad, and to better leverage trade agreements and other forums to strengthen international cooperation to crack down on trade and fakes. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for the testimony. And also, thank you on behalf of probably Commerce more than anyone else, but also all of us who are interested in SME issues. Yes. Has been a lot of work under the Obama administration and prior administrations on behalf of U.S. SMEs, and we're always looking for opportunities to do more to help particularly SME exporters who face tremendous challenges in foreign markets and aren't able to actually protect themselves in the way that large corporations are. So thank you for that. We do have time for a few questions. So NAM made 3 country recommendations this year: China, PWL, Priority Watch List; India, Priority Watch List plus OCR, which you've explained; and Russia, Priority Watch List. You also spent some time in your submission and today talking about Canada, but didn't make a specific recommendation on Canada, recognizing that all associations face internal debate on recommending countries. It would be interesting to hear from you on sort of where does Canada fit into your priorities, and what would the sort of the focus issues be for Canada as far as the committee's work in the coming year.
Thanks very much for that question, and appreciate the interest in the SME issue, which is very important for our membership. In terms of Canada, you heard what I said. It's a very important priority for us. We're very concerned about where the IP regime in that country is headed, not only with respect to patent utility, but with respect to some of the other issues raised in our written submission related to copyrights and related to pirated and counterfeit goods and cooperation and the ability of Canadian authorities to effectively enforce in that area. So this is something that's we're recognizing as an increasing concern, and want to make sure that we're prioritizing it, and hope that you will prioritize it in terms of looking at solutions to those challenges.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for at least one more question, so I'd like to turn to the Copyright Office.
Thank you. We'd like to ask the same question we asked of AFTI earlier today. With respect to an OCR in India, what would be your specific markers for progress under an OCR? And for the purpose of this discussion, let's assume the OCR has to happen in 1 year.
Well, we're hoping that the OCR can happen later this year, so so that's good. We certainly have been here before. We were here last year raising these same concerns about India. They've been outlined very clearly in Special 301 reports. India's been on the priority watch list for decades. And so I think we're all very clear about what the concerns are. And so we understand that those are being raised with the Indian government through the renewed engagement that's been underway now. There are opportunities to address some of these things. India is developing a new intellectual property rights policy, which could be a useful mechanism. But we're looking for concrete progress, real results on the things that we mentioned, and would expect that those would be prioritized in looking at an OCR and progress and results that India is making toward addressing those concerns.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you again for joining us and for your testimony and your filing. Now I'd like to invite the next witness representing the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America to join us. Welcome. Please Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Jay Taylor with Pharma. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. I represent the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. Pharma is a nonprofit association that represents America's leading global pharmaceutical research and biotechnology companies, which are devoted to inventing medicines that allow patients to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. Pharma and our member companies strongly support the important work the Special 301 Subcommittee of the Trade Policy Staff Committee and its chair, the United States Representative's Office, are doing to identify countries that deny adequate and effective intellectual property rights protection and deny fair and equitable market access to U.S. companies and individuals who rely on IP protection. The U.S. innovative biopharmaceutical industry is proud of the role that we play as one of the most vibrant sectors of our economy. Our industry supports 3.4 million jobs, and both direct and indirect, and in 2014 exported more than $54 billion in biopharmaceuticals, making the sector one of the top 5 exporters among IP-intensive industries. However, even more important than our role in the U.S. economy is industry's contribution to patient health. Intellectual property protections are critically important to support the cycle of biomedical research and innovation that leads to new life-saving medicines for the world's most debilitating diseases. IP protections like patents and regulatory data protection are necessary to spur the investment required to develop these medicines and pave the way for the innovative treatments of the future. The average cost of developing a new approved medicine is estimated at $2.6 billion, with R&D costs more than doubling over the past decade. These new medicines, in turn, become tomorrow's generic medicines. This life cycle would not exist without the IP system's support of innovators who develop new treatments and assume all the risks and costs associated with bringing new medicines to market. Indeed, the fact that the generics industry today has 80% market share in the United States is a testament to the groundbreaking research and development conducted by innovative biopharmaceutical companies. It is also why, for the generics industry to continue its growth, strong IP rights are needed to help spawn the medicines of tomorrow. The health of patients all over the world has greatly improved due to advances made by our industry. As an example, life expectancy for cancer patients is increasing, while cancer deaths have decreased 20% from the 1990s alone, according to the National Cancer Institute. Moreover, as America's population ages, our industry is working to develop new medicines for chronic diseases that will improve patient outcomes and result in fewer costly surgeries and hospital stays that put a drain on our national healthcare system. Yet for all the promise the innovative biopharmaceutical industry holds for our trading partners, many continue to engage in unfair and illegal practices that deny or restrict access to markets outside the United States, oftentimes to create an unfair advantage for their own domestic industries. As many of these nations comprise some of the most important markets for U.S. companies, their practices adversely affect American competitiveness around the world. With respect to intellectual property rights and protections, these infringements are not limited to developing countries. For example, Canada's patent utility or promise doctrine sets unreasonably stringent standards for patentability and is almost exclusively applied to innovative biopharmaceuticals, leading to the invalidation of more than 20 patents for medicines that were already in use by Canadian patients. Other countries, like India, have used tactics like compulsory licensing to force innovators to allow Indian generic companies to produce and sell copies of medicines, thereby violating the letter and spirit of the WTO TRIPS agreement. And the use of arbitrary compulsory licenses that infringe on the TRIPS agreement seems to be spreading, with Ecuador granting compulsory licenses for 6 innovative medicines in 2014. While Pharma and its member companies continue to hold out hope that the new government in India will reverse its recent course on biopharmaceutical IP, we respectfully urge the U.S. Trade Representative to continue its ongoing dialogue to encourage India to open its market in a manner that leads to substantive changes to its policies. Pharma and its member companies appreciate the U.S. government's efforts to address industry concerns regarding intellectual property protections and market access barriers. We especially value the Special 301 review process, which enables our regular engagement on these issues and provides an opportunity to measure progress each year. Our industry remains committed to working with the U.S. Trade Representative and continuing a productive dialogue with foreign governments in hope of speedy resolutions to the issues listed in our submission. Now, more than ever, governments around the world must incentivize development of revolutionary new treatments, not erect barriers that could stifle R&D investments. Governments that systematically weaken or deny IP protections for innovative medicines sacrifice long-term benefits for short-term results, and in the process endanger U.S. jobs and competitiveness, as well as patient health outcomes in the future. Pharma's member companies fully support the USTR and the U.S. government's efforts to strengthen, secure, and enforce U.S. intellectual property rights abroad, and welcome any opportunity to participate in further discussions to ensure that the world's patients have access to the newest, most technologically advanced medicines our industry has to offer. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, and thank you for leaving some time for questions. We have a few follow-ups on some of the market access issues that you raised today and in your written submission. So I'd like to first invite Commerce to ask their question, and then HHS to follow up with theirs, and with the we also have a question for Pharma on Ecuador. So if HHS can please ask that question, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. You've identified forced localization of manufacturing and tech transfer requirements as market access barriers. We're hoping you might be able to give us some examples, whether today or in follow-up, of how these policies threaten or actually harm your member companies' export opportunities. Are you being discouraged from entering the markets, or are they entering the markets with those hardships?
Thank you very much for your question, and absolutely, with all of the questions today, I look forward to following up in more detail in writing. I think when we look at an issue like forced localization, it has popped up in a handful of markets, and the concept is that, in essence, companies are not able to enter the market unless they establish a bricks and mortar facility in the market itself, and otherwise, in other words, they're forced to localize to the market. As such, I think it's the quintessential market access barrier. You can't export or enter a market unless you put in the investment to actually build up a manufacturing facility in the market itself. And if you carry that to its logical conclusion, any U.S. company subject to those requirements would be forced to build bricks and mortar facilities in every economy around the world to be able to export into those markets. So I think it is a very classic and extreme market access barrier, and look forward to following up on some of the individual country examples where we've run into that. And I think similarly on the tech transfer front, setting conditions on your ability to sell products in a market, whether it be tech transfer or forced localization, these are criteria that in a free market world and in global trade and under the WTO and other agreements, the basic rules of non-discrimination, forcing companies to transfer technology or establish a local presence in order to do business in a market is really fundamentally in opposition to some of the most basic trade tenets. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Another question about market access. You seem to argue in your submission that you consider price controls on pharmaceutical products to be market access barriers that would fall within the scope of the Special 301 process. Is it your opinion that all such price controls and all use of government purchasing and reimbursement programs to control pharmaceutical prices constitutes a denial of fair and equitable market access, or is it just some aspects of those programs that you find particularly problematic?
I think it's the latter. Obviously, there are a lot of pricing and reimbursement systems around the globe, and I think that to somehow claim that Special 301 covered all of those systems would be overreaching. But when we run into problems in markets due to particularly egregious examples of economies using pricing and reimbursement mechanisms as a means to either deteriorate market access or to eviscerate intellectual property protections that our companies have inherent in their products, that's exactly the sort of measure that we would raise through the Special 301 process. And my understanding is that the statute itself recognizes these sorts of barriers as part of the purview of this committee and of that process itself.
Okay, thank you. And just another second quick question on Ecuador. You mentioned in your testimony that Ecuador had issued 6 compulsory licenses in 2014. However, we have other submissions from stakeholders noting only 4 compulsory licenses. So we didn't know if you had an explanation for that discrepancy now, or if you could submit a list of the 6 to us so that we can just clear that up, make sure that we're all on the same page. Thanks.
Happy to do that.
Okay, I think that concludes our time. Thank
Great.
you very much
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us today, and we look forward to additional information.
Wonderful.
So now I would like to invite our next witness representing the Trademark Working Group. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
My name is Paul Kilmer, K-I-L-M-E-R, representing the Trademark Working Group. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to again provide our views in relation to adequate and effective protection of trademark rights. The group intends that its Special 301 submission will be used for the improvement of trademark law and practice through education, technical support and assistance, and diplomacy. We therefore have not requested designation of any nations as priority foreign countries or watch list nations. Our group has provided USTR with a lengthy written report, what we have dubbed our Global Trademark Report Card. However, certain nations, because of their commercial significance or the number and nature of trademark issues raised about them, appear to merit special attention. These include this year China, India, Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. I will highlight only a few of the issues to illustrate some of the problems confronted abroad by trademark owners. China. It is highly debatable whether China's new trademark law has produced a net benefit for trademark owners, particularly those outside the United States, or outside of China, I'm sorry. As our Global Trademark Report Card makes evident, the bulk of comments received from our group relate to issues encountered in China under its new law. These include short deadlines, an increase in formalities required to bring oppositions and support TRAB actions, elimination of most TRAB appeals from unfavorable opposition decisions, especially for foreign opposers, prohibitions against appealing most unfavorable TRAB rulings in cancellation and invalidation actions, again, especially for foreign petitioners, rigid application of a subclass system, disregard for witness declarations in oppositions, cancellations, and invalidation actions, overly high standards for establishing well-known mark status, a glaring lack of transparency in all phases of trademark practice, and little deference to coexistence agreements and letters of consent in the registration process. Use. Unlike the United States, most nations do not require declarations by trademark applicants that they have a bona fide intent to use the mark they seek to register. In addition, most nations do not require declarations of use after specified periods of time, such as our Section 8 requirement. In addition, the issue of use has arisen very recently in the context of Canada's proposed new trademark law. That statute would eliminate any requirement for use of a mark prior to registration. It does not require a declaration by applicants that they have a bona fide intent to use their marks in Canada, and it has no later declaration of use requirement. Canada's new law also eliminates ex parte examination on relative or likelihood of confusion grounds. Many trademark owners are concerned that Canada's proposed new law will allow trademark pirates to register the marks of others, permit a vast number of registrations for marks that will not be used, and otherwise contribute considerable deadweight to the Canadian registry. There is a growing sentiment that not only are the provisions of Canada's proposed new law contrary to the interests of brand owners, but also that the entire trend away from examination on relative grounds and the failure of most trademark laws to require declarations of bona fide intent to use for the goods and services claimed in applications are eroding the global trademark system and should be reversed. Oppositions. The absence of opposition proceedings allows trademark pirates to steal valuable brands, especially of foreign trademark owners. Therefore, nations such as Mexico, Russia, and Panama that have no opposition proceedings are fertile ground for illicit registrations. The slows. Nations such as India and Brazil, which fail to adjudicate oppositions and cancellations within a reasonable period of time, continue to deny trademark owners effective protection against infringing marks. Such systems may also be used by infringers to substantially delay registration of foreign trademarks, not based upon the merits of the actions that they bring, but instead simply due to the inefficiency of the administrative processes. Unfortunately, the formulation of various action plans and similar efforts by many of these governments has failed to alleviate the problem. Certification marks. Despite USTR's highlighting of this area in its 2014 Special 301 report, many nations ranging from Afghanistan to Uzbekistan still do not protect certification marks. And standards for approving certification marks in other nations vary to such a degree that owners of many of those designations cannot maintain consistent certification standards and regimes around the globe. It has been suggested that this situation may require multinational action to implement harmonized worldwide certification mark laws and regulations, such that certification mark owners may ensure that their marks symbolize the same standards no matter where or in relation to what products or services they are encountered by consumers. Formalities and recordations. Like China, there are many nations that continue to require a host of formalities or are overly burdensome on trademark owners. These include legalizations required by nations such as Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, Egypt, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Similarly, a number of nations continue to require recordation of license agreements to ensure the validity of those contracts. Those nations and regional groups include Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Indonesia, OAPI, Pakistan, Russia, Thailand, the UAE, and Venezuela. Such requirements are unduly burdensome and set a trap for the unwary. They both are unnecessary and inappropriate in the context of trademark registration systems. Stealth Paris Convention. There remain a number of Paris Convention nations in which newly filed applications may not be effectively located for more than 6 months. These stealth Paris Convention nations include Brazil, China, Indonesia, and the UAE. Other issues. There remain a number of nations that give no weight to consents to registration. These include Brazil, China, Colombia, Japan, and Thailand. A number of nations have not yet joined the Madrid Protocol, including Argentina, Brazil, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and the UAE. Some nations continue to require foreign registrations as a basis for a domestic trademark filing. These include Ethiopia, Libya, Nepal, and Syria. These and other practices noted in our Global Trademark Report Card pose obstacles to adequate and effective protection of trademark rights abroad. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you again for a unique and interesting filing that really creates a menu of engagement options, I think, for the U.S. government and for others. And we have some questions about that. It's interesting to see sort of those barriers to actually doing business that are so fundamental to securing your brand name, highlighted in a submission such as yours, and also to hear and see, as we did last year in your submission and will again this year, how some countries actually have rules in place that are self-defeating from the perspective of their own businesses. So you highlighted some of those in in your testimony. I did want to make one ask for one factual clarification before I ask my colleagues to ask. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. You mentioned a lack of opposition proceedings, and in your list you named Panama. Are you referring to a complete lack of opposition proceedings, or are you referring to the problems such as those that were highlighted by Bridgestone that make the opposition proceedings high risk to take advantage
Right.
of?
I mean, no effective opposition proceedings for foreign companies in particular.
Great, thank you. So I guess why don't I ask my Commerce colleague to go ahead and ask his question.
I wanted to join Susan and thank you for the clarity and specificity with which you've articulated a number of your country issues. My question is really a process question as to whether the Trademark Working Group or any of its members engage directly with foreign governments to work through some of those issues. If so, what has the reception been? What have the results been? Or in the alternative, would you want to increase your own involvement with our embassies, our foreign commercial service, to take on some more of that work with us?
Our membership has, as you know, chosen to remain anonymous because they do have matters pending before virtually every trademark office that was mentioned in my report. They are somewhat reluctant as a result to engage in direct dialogue with those governments. I think they would be very happy if our group, through me, was engaged in some of these issues with the panel and USTR, and we would certainly enjoy the opportunity to do that. I have introduced a few companies as a result of this submission last year to the Commerce Department at certain levels, and we have had some internal meetings. Those were in particular regarding issues that had arisen in China, but also elsewhere, including our out-of-cycle report on counterfeit markets in Nigeria, which I think you'll find excerpts of in the trademark report card, and as well in relation to India. And we would welcome the opportunity to participate more fully and certainly would accept and welcome your guidance in that regard.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. Let me just acknowledge also your submission to the Notorious Markets process. This is a list that's published annually that focuses on online and physical markets around the world that contribute to counterfeiting and piracy. We expect to release the review of 2014 activities in this space within the next 2 weeks. So please everyone watch for that. So thank you very much, and I'd like to...
Susan, sorry. Could I just ask if you could provide a follow-up submission with regard to your members' views about Canadian Bill C-8, which received royal assent last year. So we'd be interested in whether or not your members believe that this new law in Canada, which provides, among other things, Canadian Customs with ex officio authority to detain and seize goods, will make a difference.
Right, and that will be a helpful element. The ex officio authority is something lacking in other customs regimes as well, and I think Canada has at least stepped forward on that, although, as I highlighted in my presentation, there are a few other areas we feel like it's slipping in the wrong direction.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that's having an understanding of that would be very, very helpful. So I'd like to invite our next witness, representative of the Union for Affordable Cancer Treatments. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Manon Ann Ress, R-E-S-S, and I'm here for the Union for Affordable Cancer Treatment, UACT, which is an international network of people affected by cancer who share the conviction that the most efficient existing cancer treatments and care should be available everywhere for everyone, regardless of gender, age, or nationality. Our membership includes cancer patients, doctors, and some lawyers, of course. They do get cancer too, and all their families and people who care for them. As stated in UACT submission to the 2015 Special 301 review, we object to the United States Trade Representative pressure on foreign government to reject measures such as compulsory licenses, limits on the granting of patents, cost containment and price controls, and other mechanisms to provide their population with affordable cancer drugs. As a recent report by Oxfam indicated, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, cancer is one of the leading causes of death around the world, with 8.2 million deaths in 2012. More than 60% of the world's new cases of cancer occur in Africa, Asia, and Central and South America. These regions account for 70% of the world cancer's death. According to the report, in low and middle income countries, expensive treatments for cancer are not widely available, of course. Unsustainable cancer medication pricing has increasingly become a global issue, creating access challenge in low and middle income, but also, of course, high income countries. End of quote. So today, we know we have a handful of game-changer drugs in the cancer treatment field. By game changers, I mean drug that adds time and quality to the lives of cancer patients. For example, and we heard quite a bit about this example today, let us look at dasatinib, I don't know how to pronounce it, a drug for a rare form of leukemia. For UACT, the dasatinib dispute between the U.S. and India illustrated the failing of U.S. trade policy and its impact on cancer patients. In a previous submission to USTR during the 2014 out-of-cycle review of India on October 29, 2014, UACT pointed on the impact on cancer patients of those pressure on access to treatment for this very rare form of leukemia. The Bristol-Myers Squibb price for dasatinib is more than $100 per day in a country with a per capita income of $4.30 per day. This, of course, makes it unreachable for the majority of leukemia patients in India. Therefore, the U.S. government opposition to a compulsory license on dasatinib is de facto an endorsement of an excessive price and will have predictably harsh consequences for leukemia patients who have developed resistance to the older drug. As a side note, since the question came up several times, I would like to remind people here that there's a very good WTO website that explained quite well, if you go to WTO.org and then TRIPS and then public health, that compulsory licensing do not need to be a response to an emergency. There's actually a website that explains this, and it says that they have to be an emergency. Not necessarily, that's the answer by the WTO. This is a common misunderstanding. The TRIPS agreement does not specifically list a reason that might be used to justify compulsory license. However, the Doha Declaration on TRIPS and Public Health confirmed that countries are free to determine the grounds for granting compulsory licenses. And I think this website is very useful for all of us. But let's go back to the other game-changer drugs, such as Herceptin or Kadcyla, formerly known as TDM1 for advanced breast cancer, for the 20% that are HER2 positive, which is a rare 20% form of aggressive breast cancer. Most recently, maybe ironically, this month, on Cancer Day, the FDA also approved the Pfizer drug Ibrance, again, I don't know how to pronounce this, which is a lifesaver for patients with the most common estrogen-positive but HER2-negative advanced breast cancer. All these drugs that I mentioned are near or over $100,000 a year. These treatments are not accessible to most women on Earth, of course, and even hardly available in Europe. The UK NICE, which is like the NIH, has rejected actually Kadcyla as too expensive. And in some European countries, such as Ireland, of course, patients are not even tested for the aggressive HER2 positive type of breast cancer because they will not get Herceptin or Kadcyla, no matter what. Why test them? In the U.S., to access treatment, patients have to rely on the employers, including Medicare and other government program or agencies, who have to pay higher and higher premiums and, of course, their health insurance. Indeed, very few individuals in the U.S. could afford to pay out-of-pocket these kind of treatments. But without these drugs, most women with advanced breast cancer die of premature and painful death. I myself have lived the last 4 years and 8 months and a half of my life thanks to access to these game-changer drugs. First Herceptin, and now after developing resistance to Herceptin and having tried 4 other chemotherapy drugs, Kadcyla, my very own game-changer, hopefully. However, it remains heartbreaking for me and for my family to know that only a few breast cancer patients have access to the same treatment that are keeping me alive and well today. But even if you, in fact, do not want to think about what is happening to cancer patients in other countries, UACT is challenging the idea that USTR is advancing U.S. interests by promoting stronger monopolies of medicine and preventing access to these treatments. The UACT argument is based upon the following. 1. While we recognize, of course, that developing new drugs is expensive and risky, we know that BMS, Roche, or Pfizer in fact benefited extensively from U.S. government research subsidies, including NIH-funded research and clinical trials, universities, public and private, and 50% tax credit to fund trials. Number 2, the price of these cancer drugs is excessive everywhere for everyone, especially for drugs developed with extensive U.S. government subsidies. 3, UACT believes that such trade pressures to prevent other countries from using legal mechanisms such as compulsory licensing to manufacture generics and provide access to cancer drug in other resource-poor settings is immoral and bad foreign policy. 4, U.S. citizens are especially harmed by the high prices on cancer drugs, in part because of an aging population that is more likely to require cancer-related chemotherapy. By 2020, more than 60% of the U.S. population will be 65, and by 2030, the percentage will be 19.3%. For more detail, I will refer you to a previous submission letter to Ambassador Fraudemann that we sent October 29. 5, finally, USTR, this committee, you, must recognize that for most cancer patients, there is no alternative to these life-saving drugs, and cancer patients cannot continue to be held hostage in a system of threats to ration drugs. In conclusion, UACT reaffirms its position to USTR trade policy to prevent access to treatment to the majority of cancer patients on this planet and create an unnecessary and harmful scarcity of drug that can save, extend, and improve the lives of cancer patients everywhere. Reducing the number of compulsory licenses, preventing developing countries from sourcing generic cancer drugs from the few countries that could actually manufacture them is in fact systematically ending any hope for cancer patients to live longer and better lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for appearing here today. You know, even in the context of the Special 301 hearing, you know, listening to testimony such as yours is of course difficult to hear and very emotional. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate your courage in being here. As I said earlier, you know, this hearing has a very specific purpose, and that is for us to assess the intellectual property and market access issues with respect to trading partner markets, and use the information that we get today to conduct the review and determine which countries are identified in the report. However, we are definitely open to competing points of view and to additional information and facts, and always welcome that. This isn't a debate, so I don't want to go point by point in addressing some of the things that you said, but I think some of the statements that you made about U.S. policy, I feel that I need to clarify and perhaps add some shed some light on very quickly before we turn to the questions. First, obviously, you know, I think it's said any time that IPR and pharmaceuticals are mentioned, the U.S. government reiterates its commitment to the Doha Declaration on Public Health and the resulting amendment in the TRIPS agreement, which we have accepted, and encourage other countries to also accept, to bring into force, so that we're not operating under the waiver that we've been operating under now for over 10 years. I would invite you to please review last year's report, Special 301 report, and identify for us instances in the report in which we addressed compulsory licenses in a way that is inconsistent with the Doha Declaration. I think as a committee we try very hard to stay within the boundaries if we address compulsory licensing at all. But I'm interested to know if, specific examples of where we may not have done that so that we can redouble our efforts this year. Third, I think from our perspective as people who work in the agencies on intellectual property, we believe that innovation is key to public health. We heard earlier a figure of $2.6 billion to bring new drugs to market. Many people are alive today because of those drugs. We appreciate that not everyone has access to the drugs, and that, as a society, both protecting the innovation piece of this, but also ensuring that patients get the care that they need is very important. There are many choices to be made along the spectrum. They are not mutually exclusive. There are a lot of factors that contribute to a lack of access beyond price, and we try to deal with those as well. We don't have the time today. This is not the format for that. And then finally, it's been mentioned now a couple of times about Americans bearing the cost of pharmaceutical products, and obviously as the U.S. government, that will take on an increasing role in that in the coming years. Cost is important to us as it is to governments around the world. But I think that there are those who feel that one of the reasons why Americans bear the cost is because companies aren't able to access foreign markets in an effective way. And again, I'm just highlighting the issue. I'm not taking a position on it today, but know that I think that we try to consider all of these factors when we determine what to highlight in the report. But so I'd like to ask HHS to lead off with our questions, but please do review last year's report, and please do tell us if, in your opinion, and this goes for everyone in the room, if you see something in the report that you think we need to do a better job of, if there's something that's factually incorrect or something that should be handled differently, we are open to the public's suggestions and recommendations with regard to the report itself, not only the process. So I'd like to invite my colleague from HHS.
Thank you so much for coming today. Recognizing that in the title of your organization is the word affordable, does your organization do any analysis or examination of non-price barriers to access?
Right now, the Union for Affordable Care Treatment is in the beginning of its creation. We started in October, and we have decided to focus on the price of medicine because many public health groups worry about other things, and it seems almost like a taboo to talk about the price of life, and we've decided to look at it. And no, at this point, we're just focusing on how much does it cost to get treatment and why. And of course, other people will come up with a suggestion and recommendation on maybe how to fix this. And I would refer to my colleague from KEI and my husband, Jamie Love, because of course he's written extensively on prices and R&D. I don't know if you saw the New York Times article today about the prices by Ezekiel Emmanuel, but it's quite an interesting piece about linking R&D and prices. Unfortunately, he said something stupid about cancer, but that's nothing is perfect.
And since I took so much, I'd like to maybe ask one more question, Commerce, if you could. Actually, I think HHS wrapped that into their question. I think that was covered. I think the way that you asked your question, Emily, covered both of those. Okay, so let me just add one last thing, the same question that we posed to KEI.
Mm-hmm.
This, and again, you said your focus has been on cost, but to in our view, it's important if civil society can join in this issue of online pharmacies and online and the wide availability of counterfeit drugs and the harms that those do. Of course, we would like your reflections on that if you would kindly provide them before Friday. Perhaps a joint filing with KEI or separately on the issue of the online pharmacies and trying to address that question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to invite our next witness representing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Global Intellectual Property Center. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Patrick Kilbride. I'm the Executive Director for International Intellectual Property at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Intellectual Property Center. I'll try to be brief. I wanted to, first of all, thank you as representatives of the U.S. government for your efforts through the Special 301 process and in other mechanisms to advance intellectual property law globally. At the GIPC, we believe that intellectual property is an indispensable catalyst to innovation, that it is a legal mechanism that creates an opportunity to attach value to an idea, thereby helping the innovator take an intangible and turn it into a product that can be successfully brought to market. Without that legal certainty, it's been our observation that there's a critical step missing, that innovators aren't able on a large scale, whether they're small businesses or multinational companies, to take that leap from brilliant idea to workable product that can be enjoyed by consumers globally. And in fact, we think that there's really, if there's a secret sauce in innovation, it's the intellectual property system of legal rights that's been developed, and that is really limited, unfortunately, I think, to a handful of countries at this point that allows innovation on a large scale. One need only to look at the success of Silicon Valley, for instance, to recognize that dynamic, which, interestingly, nearly half of all patents granted to entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are to immigrant inventors. I think underlying the notion that entrepreneurs globally come to where strong intellectual property laws exist so that they can successfully turn their ideas into products. And with that in mind, GIPC approached its submission for the 301 review this year in the spirit of offering observations about both systemic and country-specific challenges. So we included a number of countries in our submission, countries like Australia and Canada, that might not normally land on a list of the worst performers for intellectual property. In fact, in our own GIPC International IP Index, which ranks 30 key markets, those countries have scored among the top intellectual property environments in the world. However, there are specific issues in each of the countries we've mentioned in our report that we think bear mentioning. And so I do want to ask that the GIPC Index, which informs our submission, be incorporated by reference. We included it in our formal submission to the system. A couple specific countries and specific issues. First, China. I think it's been our observation that in China there has been an emerging domestic constituency of innovators that has driven greater and greater Chinese government attention to the importance of intellectual property. And as a result, we've started to see some incremental but important steps towards building out a stronger system, including recently the establishment of some specialized IP courts. Our big concern, a big concern, is that as China's attention to intellectual property helps to create a more stable environment, that it's applied in a non-discriminatory fashion. Several of the measures that have been put in place have could be applied in ways that are favorable to domestic innovators, but not to foreign investors. And U.S. government attention to that dynamic is going to continue to be important. In India, and I would mention that I had the opportunity to visit India last week and sit down with a number of stakeholders in and out of government there, and would note that the U.S. government engagement in the last month with the government of India has been important, and it's been substantive, and we believe it's been productive. And one of the ways that we've seen that illustrated was in the de-emphasis on compulsory licenses by the government of India. In fact, there were reports that a cabinet-level committee that had been established to review compulsory license petitions had been disbanded. We think that's an important step. The rhetoric coming out of the government about the importance of intellectual property to India's economic competitiveness has been very welcome. I do think it's important to note, however, that we've not yet seen the substantive policy changes that would lead to or would validate a change in India's designation in the Special 301. Finally, I want to mention Canada because as a relatively strong performer of intellectual property, some of the exceptions are glaring, and in particular, I want to mention the Promise Doctrine, which we believe is an added step discriminating against the rights of U.S. patent holders in particular because of the way it's been applied. And with that, just to mention two specific issues very quickly. One, going back to compulsory licenses. The challenge here is that when a compulsory license is issued, and especially if it's issued for reasons that are ambiguous, that don't point to a clear motivation like a national emergency, then it doesn't just affect the product that's licensed. It affects every participant in the industry space because it undermines the legal certainty that they can attach to their rights. So it has a chilling effect for the country itself on foreign direct investment, but then also more broadly on investment in innovative industries and really threatens the pipeline of innovative products. A second is, which we've seen in several countries, I'll mention India in particular because its Section 3D has been so infamous, is this application of additional patentability requirements to what is envisioned in TRIPS. And the problem here is that when you've got a product that goes off patent and becomes available to whether it's generic companies in the case of pharmaceutical industry or to other innovators to build and develop off that platform, if you put additional steps in place, then you've basically prevented innovators from taking that further on. You've said this is as far as we're going to go and no further. So it's an anti-competitive position that benefits the generics to the detriment of further innovation. So with those few specific comments, I'd like to leave the rest of the time for your questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and for introducing the report into the discussion. You have the ability to do much greater detailed analysis than we are able to do. So it's always helpful to have that from all parties that participate in this process. For many of you who may not know, the ITC is actually an observer on the committee. So we actually can draw from their expertise and the results of their work as well when we're doing our deliberations. So because you represent such a wide range of companies and interests, we have several different categories of questions, but considering the time, I think I'd like to focus on the questions that we've scheduled for the online issues and for this kind of emerging area of piracy. So if you can, if the Copyright Office can lead off, and then if DOJ can follow with the third question, that would be.
Thank you. As you know, internet pirate sites around the world often profit from U.S.-based ad networks, advertising, and payment processors. And so we're curious to know, what is the Chamber doing to encourage your 3 million member businesses to monitor major pirate sites around the world and to ensure that they are not unknowingly advertising on and or providing services to pirates? And as a follow-up, is this message getting through to all the local chambers that you are affiliated with in other countries?
Well, thanks very much. I think intellectual property is very much a local level. Our state and local chambers work with the local broadcast networks, the innovative companies, the internet service providers around the country who actually are the implementers of intellectual property, and in the online space, the channels for distribution of that content. And so our efforts have been, together with the relevant industry associations, to really inform government of the policy challenges. I think we certainly envision as part of our mission and mandate to be a source of information, and to more broadly to the public. It's not something we've been resourced to do in the online content space, unfortunately, in recent years. I will mention a specific effort, though. Leading into the holidays, we did public service announcements that aired on television and radio around the country in December, talking about the dangers of counterfeit goods and urging shoppers to be aware of, and how to look for pirate sites.
Actually, if we can just ask, if I can ask my colleagues from DOJ and the Copyright Office, just basically read off the other two questions and ask if you could please submit information post-hearing in response to those, that would be much appreciated.
Of course.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you very much for your testimony. You stated in your written testimony that that there are signs that things are changing very rapidly in China, in particular in the online space. Are you suggesting by that statement that there's been significant improvement in online counterfeiting and piracy? If so, what are those signs, and why do you believe this is happening? Also, do you believe that things are improving more with regard to B2B platforms such as Alibaba and HC, online sharing sites such as Soonlay, or both?
Thank you. I'll be happy to respond.
And then thank you for the record. We note that the GIPC is one of the several submitters that has identified a sort of a new type of piracy in Asia, the media box piracy, or set-top piracy it's called. And these devices are generally manufactured in China and exported to overseas markets, many in Asia. And your testimony said that you're hopeful that China will take a, quote, firm stand against this type of infringing activity and take enforcement efforts to eradicate this problem. And what we're looking to hear from you is, what specific actions do you think that China, as well as its neighbors, should take to address this media box problem? And also, is there a customs element involved?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like to invite our final witness of the day, the representative of the U.S.-China Business Council. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin when you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you for the pleasure of going last. My name is Ryan Ong, and I am the Director of Business Advisory Services for the U.S.-China Business Council here in Washington. And on behalf of the U.S.-China Business Council, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak with you about intellectual property rights in China, one of the U.S.'s most important commercial markets, and generally a highlight for the Special 301 report. USCBC represents approximately 210 U.S. companies doing business in the China market, including manufacturers, service providers, and agricultural and resources companies, so we have a broad industry mix. Over its history of more than 40 years, USCBC has worked to raise and address operational issues and market barriers that U.S. companies face in China so that American businesses and workers can prosper from that company's tremendous economic growth. IP enforcement has long been one of those top challenges. In our most recent annual member company survey, IP protection ranked as our number 2 issue, behind only competition with Chinese companies. 91% of those responding across industries and geographies said that they were concerned about IP protection in China, and nearly half of those said that they were very concerned. So first, the positive. U.S. companies believe and see that the IP landscape in China has seen steady progress, even if that progress has been slow. We see that progress in a number of very different areas. On the regulatory side, China is actively working to update all of its major IP laws and regulations. The first of these, the trademark law, went into effect last May with positive and negative elements that you already heard a great deal about today. Others, including the patent law, the copyright law, and importantly for us, the trade secrets-related anti-unfair competition law, are all in the process of being revised. During these revisions, regardless of whether or not U.S. industry has always liked the results, Chinese regulators have sought to actively engage with U.S. stakeholders, including U.S. government and industry, to consider questions, comments, concerns, and recommendations. In addition, and several panelists have mentioned this already, Chinese stakeholders, including policymakers, enforcement officials, companies, and the general public, are more aware than ever before of the benefits of promoting IP protection in China and the real cost of IP infringement for both the Chinese and the global economy. Such growing awareness has led to new policies to address emerging IP issues, expanded or extended enforcement campaigns, more government resources dedicated to combating IP infringement, and greater engagement with the U.S. counterparts, as many of you know. Hard-won outcomes, and emphasis on hard-won outcomes, at the 2014 Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade and the Strategic and Economic Dialogue on equal treatment for foreign and domestic IP, inventor remuneration, online piracy, trade secret legislation, and other priority topics are but one indication of this progress, as well as the work that remains. However, and it's a big however, U.S. companies still face significant and rapidly evolving issues protecting their IP in China. Though there is no one-size-fits-all solution to these problems, there is a common message. Inadequate IP protection is a clear, negative, operational impact on U.S. companies in China. Nearly half of companies in our 2014 member company survey indicated that China's level of IP protection limits their R&D activities in China, and at least 30% indicated that it limits the types of products they're willing to manufacture, license, or sell in that market. These issues limit a company's ability to grow in China, hindering, more importantly, its overall success in ways that impact its growth in other markets, including here in the United States. So where do we need progress? U.S. companies regularly cite the need for further improvements to key laws and regulations, including those I've mentioned already, better access to China's existing IP enforcement channels, greater government resources to tackle infringement, and stronger and more consistent political will to enforce China's IP laws and regulations at all levels of government. I'd like to highlight a few specific areas here, and I'm happy to provide greater detail in our follow-up discussion and/or in our written submission. First, despite efforts by Chinese lawmakers to build a comprehensive IP and legal framework, and those efforts have been significant, that work remains incomplete. Revisions to existing IP laws have yet to address a number of key structural barriers to IP enforcement, such as value thresholds that effectively prevent companies from pursuing criminal enforcement, caps on administrative fines and civil damages for IP infringement, patent examination processes that promote the proliferation of low-quality design and utility model patents, inappropriate invalidations of pharmaceutical patents, limited authority for trademark enforcement officials to seize and destroy counterfeit goods, and an inadequate scope for copyright protection. In addition, there's a growing body of laws and regulations that touch on IP in ways that raise concerns for U.S. companies. These laws and regulations include policies focused on innovation incentives, investor compensation standards, government procurement, antitrust, standard setting, and increasingly national security. Many of these policies appear to be based on local ownership of IP, require companies to provide IP to government entities as a part of approval processes, or appear designed to ensure greater access to IP by Chinese companies at below market cost. We strongly encourage the U.S. government to continue its efforts to monitor and engage the Chinese on each of these areas of policy as they arise. Second, enforcement remains insufficient and inconsistent. Companies' experience with IP enforcement varies considerably from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Local protectionism is an important factor in many of these cases, yet there are also structural barriers. Even proactive government officials must deal with inadequate resources, limited capacity, caps on fines, and competing regulatory priorities that prevent them from seeking robust IP engagement. On the judicial side, companies often cannot make full use of the courts due to formal and informal barriers, such as limited use of judicial procedures such as preliminary injunctions, heavy administrative burdens for companies to gather, document, and legalize evidence, and difficulties in enforcing court judgments. All of these factors cause many companies to doubt their ability to use China's enforcement channels effectively. Some companies do importantly report successful cases, particularly civil and administrative cases. Yet the numbers of cases that doubt the viability of each of these channels is significant, and further detail on that is provided in our written submission. China's recent launch of specialized IP courts in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou has generated some hope for improvements, but it is not yet clear at this point how much these courts may impact companies' ability to enforce their IP. And this presents a potential area for significant engagement at the local level. One priority area within the enforcement space is the online space, online counterfeiting and piracy. Companies have long dealt with these issues, online piracy from sharing sites, as well as online counterfeiting issues with B2B platforms. But the number and the nature of the issues that companies are facing are evolving rapidly and include everything from, hold on just one second, include everything from domain name squatting to search engine results that prioritize counterfeit versions of their products. We encourage you to continue to push the Chinese to improve both regulation and enforcement in the online space in ways that promote accountability and cooperation for both legitimate IP rights holders and internet intermediaries. In sum, we recognize the progress that China is making on these issues, as well as the significant issues, and encourage you as you're drafting this year's Special 301 report to recognize both of those areas. Given our members' continued level of concern, however, we continue to recommend that China remains on the priority watch list for 2015. We strongly encourage the U.S. government to pursue the IP challenges facing U.S. companies in China through all existing bilateral dialogues and cooperative channels, including the JCCT, SNED, the U.S.-China IP Cooperation Framework, as well as other formal and informal opportunities for dialogue. And we stand ready at any point in time to be able to assist in these efforts or provide further information on our member companies' perspective and experience with IP in China. Thank you for your time. I would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that sweeping portrait of one of our most important trading partners. I think we have time for one question, and then perhaps I could take you up on your offer of following up and highlight a couple of other issues.
Absolutely.
For a post-hearing submission. So, State, why don't you ask our one formal question?
Thanks very much, Susan. Yes, I want to focus in on your submission where you highlighted growing concerns from the business community that China is using national security as a justification for limiting U.S. firms from selling technology products specifically to the banking and telecom sectors. So what type of actions has the Chinese government taken that give preference to China's indigenous IP over foreign IP, and what are the financial ramifications for U.S. firms?
Sure. I'll start just by talking a little bit about these policies that you mentioned. So the China Banking Regulatory Commission and the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, two of the industry regulators that govern respectively banking and telecommunications, released new regulations late last year that seem to require companies seeking to participate in procurement activities with those respective industries to require them to provide, to ensure that their products have safe and controllable technology without necessarily, within the scope of those regulations, a clear understanding of what that actually means. We have heard and working actively with others across the industry space on this issue, solid indications that that definition may include problematic areas for U.S. companies, such as requiring them to turn over their source code to Chinese government entities, requiring domestic ownership of IP, those types of issues. It's a little bit unclear because this issue is rapidly evolving. The ramifications here, there's obviously a direct set of ramifications for companies whose products may potentially be involved in or boxed out of these types of procurement activities. But there are also potential ramifications for other companies in those sectors as well as outside of those sectors. For example, the CBRC regulations are not limited purely to state-owned or domestic banks. The way the regulations are addressed would appear to also apply to foreign banks that are operating in the China market. And so I think we've been in active conversation with not only our companies in the IT space, but also in the banking space to help them understand and get a sense how they're looking at this issue and what the ramifications may be for them. The other concern that we and I think others have had here is the possibility of spread to other areas of procurement or to other sectors, and concern that companies, even companies whose products do not necessarily have clear national security implications or clear IP implications, could find themselves boxed out of potential procurement and a potential part of their market because procurement officials may cite national security because of their foreign nature. And so we're monitoring very closely and to understand how this issue may play out.
And very quickly to flag for follow-up, I think we would like you to hear your insights with regard to the same question that we asked of the Chamber of Commerce on the online situation. The signs basically that the situation may be changing, that there may be some significant improvement. Basically, some more details on your assessment of that situation. Are there particularly problematic platforms that are resisting change? Are there others that are more that are showing more improvement? And then finally, in the context of developing the 2014 Notorious Markets Report, which I've mentioned a few times, which is an out-of-cycle review of Special 301 and some of the issues, some issues that we'll be reviewing this year with respect to China. Export controls and China as an origin of a lot of the product that ends up in some of the markets overseas that were nominated for inclusion in the Notorious Markets. Just your view on sort of the current state of export controls against counterfeit and pirated products in the physical space, and what opportunities you might see for engagement both by the private sector and by the government on that issue, I think would be helpful.
Great. I'm more than happy to do.
Great. Okay. With that testimony, I think that concludes our list of witnesses for today. I have just a couple of closing remarks that are mostly logistical. Obviously, we've mentioned a few times today that there is an opportunity for witnesses to submit post-hearing comments or responses to the questions that they were asked today. The Special 301 docket on regulations.gov will remain open until midnight on Friday, the 27th. We ask that any follow-up documents be filed through regulations.gov. Obviously, today we had a video of the testimony as well as a transcript of the entire proceeding. Both of those we hope to post to ustr.gov and stopfakes.gov within 2 weeks. It may take us a little bit longer to get that together, but definitely our target is 2 weeks from today. Thank you to everyone, to all of our witnesses, to my colleagues in the Special 301 Committee, those who sat up here, and those who have joined us in the audience. And thank you to everyone for your interest in this process, your input into this process, and we're looking forward to a robust 2015 review. So be safe out there, and let's hope for a spring which is too far delayed. But thank you again. So the 2015 Special 301 hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much.